Remember, the worst day was the Wednesday when the money market funds broke the buck, if you remember that day. And that night, Tuesday night overnight, the financial clearing system of the country almost failed. And the Federal Reserve had to go in and hand money to the clearinghouses to essentially make sure that the money, the dollar, if you will, that was clearing overnight was cleared properly the next day. And I said to myself, how do we get ourselves into this situation? And I still don't know the answer to that question.
Assuming, though, that Google keeps its cash in very safe banks.
In fact, what we did is we took it out of the banks and we put it into sovereign-denominated currencies because we figured that the countries would not go bankrupt.
This country's currency, too, yeah?
We did a basket.
All right, good. How are you, assuming all that's true.
It is, trust me, it's true. I'm a CEO, I can't lie. It's like a real
it's
problem.
my job, I have to ask those questions. How are you feeling then about where we are in terms of fixing it?
Well, again, with the caveat that I don't understand how the learned and smart people who were running all of this could have gotten us into this situation in the first place. So with that as a caveat, right? And I think we should have a discussion as to how that happened and how, not just so much from a regulatory perspective, but what was the failure in information that got us to the point where we were in a really good bubble and having a good time and the currency almost failed, right? Now, that's like a serious error. It's not a small error. With that as a caveat, we're roughly on schedule. If you look at the sequence of events that once the crisis occurred, everyone realized that asset values were too high. You had first a real estate crisis, and then you had a credit and finance bubble. The credit and finance bubble was largely because of unregulated credit instruments, which were shut down with the bankruptcy of Lehman. Everything sort of collapsed, and then we had sort of October, November, December, where everyone's all panicked. The federal government, the Fed comes in with trillions of dollars of guarantees. People forget that there were about $2.5 trillion of additional guarantees of bonds and bond debts, most of which will not need to be delivered on, by the way. The total indebtedness that was guaranteed by the Western world and the United States was on the order of $8 to $9 trillion if you add it all up. These are enormous amounts of money. Remember, the U.S. GDP is 14 trillion. So we sort of created all of that. Then we had the stimulus package, which is designed as a short term, which I was strongly in favor of. And then you have the time that it takes for the system to work. And we're in that period now. Market low roughly in the spring, business cycle low roughly now, jobless high roughly early 2010. We're on schedule. How do I know this? Because the people who got us into this have told us that. Right? So what's a better answer?
Yeah.
What's a better answer? Sorry. If you look at the history, one of the things to learn is when you manage young people is to explain to them that things have occurred in history before. And young people don't often know that or ignore it because they didn't take those classes. And in our case, we're in a classic deep recession, and recessions recover. And I've just outlaid the exact math around a traditional deep recession.
Yeah, but hold on a second, because if you take all of the smarts of Google's computers and pile it into one
we were
big...
not part of that.
No, you're not. But let's take,
we were not in fact, had we been doing it, we might have actually been measuring where all the money was.
Well, you guys as a symbol of all the world's knowledge, right, which are out there to collate and make useful. Okay.
Thank you.
If you take that and you combine it with these really smart people and rising asset values, how did so many smart people running the companies and the economy do so many stupid things?
Well, partly because everybody was in their self-interest to believe it. Right? People have studied bubbles for years. I mean, remember high tech? We already had our own bubble. You had your own. You had a bigger bubble. We've been through one bubble, which was 2000, the Y2K phenomena, and we had a great time. Next time, I'm going to sell at the peak. Right? I mean, I'm just waiting for the next one of these market-induced bubbles. I could have made a lot of money at the time. Right? It's much better to sell at the high in these bubbles. Trust me.
There is, though. No. Yes, we should sell at the high.
Look, this is about ideas. There's an idea for you. Sell at the top.
All right. So let's have another idea about how we can get ourselves out of this mess. Do we just sit here and wait for it to happen, or can companies in the economy do something smart?
Well, first place, let's go back to what's really going to happen. I think The U.S. will recover first. The European economy is slower to recover. The conventional wisdom is a 6 months off cycle. That's about right. An interesting insight about the Europeans is that they have their central bank, which is called the European Central Bank, has one mission, which is fighting inflation, and ours has two missions, fighting inflation and promoting growth. And this is called, there's a technical name for this among all the economists. But what's interesting about the European Central Bank is that they have been giving enormously friendly loans to all of these countries to help out, which looks awfully stimulative. So the European Central Bank, within the charter that it has, is doing something similar to what the U.S. is doing. And I think Europe will recover as well. And they're not going to give up their vacations or anything like that in the meantime.
Heaven forbid.
So the fact of the matter is I think that's going to happen. In China, you had the stimulus package. And in China, they had an infrastructure stimulus package, not unlike what we did. The difference is they just did it. They didn't debate it. Some benefits to a command and control economy or whatever you want to call it, China. And it looks like the third world, and in particular the smaller countries, are very severely hurt by what happened because they were in an asset bubble in terms of minerals and so forth, and they also have huge trade imbalances. So we're going to go back to a structure where if you will, the strongest, China, to some degree India, the United States, and Europe, will lead us through this over the next few years.
Why? Why is the United States going to get out first and not China drag us along?
Well, I personally think it has to do with our university systems. Ultimately, the reason these things occur in America has a lot to do with the culture of America. And Americans are optimists. Americans believe in innovation. 90%, 95% of the top universities in the world are in the United States. Many people have tried to replicate these systems. They're very hard to replicate. If you look at venture capital, which I've obviously benefited from, the financial structure combined with new young people trying to create new jobs is phenomenal. We have the fastest growth cycle in terms of new jobs. A typical example is there's a claim that 15% of the jobs every year are eliminated, and another 15%, of course, are created. And that's no solace to you if you are working in an area where the only kinds of jobs, typical example being the traditional American automobile industry, those are the only kinds. The other ones aren't being created. But if you look at the economy as an aggregate, there are other jobs being created. They're just not in your town. And that's difficult. But that's ultimately the genius of the American system.